when Jesus gets to Martha, to verse 24, verse 21, she says, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. It's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I titled this is another glory story. And it could be preached on Easter as well, but Jesus says that he did all of this so that God would be glorified. But what happened is that this story, what he did here, was one of the catalysts that kind of led to his death as well. Last week we were in John 9 with the blind man, the man who's born blind receiving his sight. And then chapter 10 is where Jesus continues that conversation and talking about how he is the good shepherd and that anyone that tries to come over the wall is not good, basically telling them that. And then he goes off to somewhere across the Jordan where John the Baptist had been baptizing. And that's where he is when he hears about his good friend who is sick. And Bethany is where he lived with his sisters Mary and Martha. And then John puts in this note, which I'm not sure why, because the story doesn't happen until chapter 12, that this is Mary who poured the perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So they send word to Jesus because they're good friends, and when Jesus heard, he says the sickness will not end in death. No, it is for the glory of God. So that's where I go, well, this is another glory story. Because that's what he said about the man born blind. The situation is here, God's going to be glorified in it. So the Son of God is going to be glorified in it. Now, he loved them. So you would expect that if he loved them and they're such good friends, as soon as he hears that Lazarus is sick, he's going to scoot it on over to Bethany and get there so that his friend does not die and he gets well. But we know the story that he didn't. He hears about it, then he hangs back 2 more days. And I don't know, it was probably another couple of days to travel from where he was to Bethany. I don't know, but he waited. And then he says, okay, let's go back to Judea. They're concerned, though, because they know that it's not a good idea necessarily to go back to Judea because they're already after Jesus. They already don't like him, and they're already looking for ways that they can get him. So they're concerned. They tried to stone you once. Are you sure that this is something you want to do, to go back there? And it's kind of weird what he says. He says, well, there are 12 hours of daylight, and anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And basically what he's telling them is we'll be fine. We're walking in the light of God. We're walking in God's will. We're not going to stumble. We're not going to fall. And it's going to be fine. It's when I leave, that's when the darkness comes, that we need to be concerned. But we're going to be fine. He's just falling asleep. I'm just going to go wake him up. Doesn't that sound so happy? I'm just going to go wake him up. He knows what he's going to do. They're not so sure. Well, if he sleeps, then he'll get better. Jesus talking about death, they're thinking about natural sleep. And then Jesus tells them plainly, Lazarus is dead. He's dead. That's it. He's dead. There's no sleeping. And for your sake, I'm glad I'm not here, because I think they were wrestling with some unbelief there as well, which he typically does with the disciples anyway, because they don't fully come into that full belief until after the resurrection and when the Holy Spirit comes. So they're still wrestling with that. It's like, so you may believe, and this is the Gospel of John's whole point, and he says it, I don't know how many times he's got that word in there. The point is, so people will believe. I'm glad I'm not there. I'm glad that my friend is dead. I'm glad that his sisters are suffering. So you'll believe. Let's go. And then Thomas says to him, okay, let's go. Let's all die. Now is he being, kind of sarcastic? I doubt it. Somebody I listened to made the point where we should really think of him as very courageous instead of a doubter, because he's the one that said, let's go. If we're going to die, if he's going to die, let's all die with him. So they go. So they get there, and Jesus finds out that Lazarus is already in the tomb. He's been in there for 4 days. So I say, I don't know how long it's been, But it's important. That 4 days is important to the story. And now Bethany is really close to Jerusalem. I was thinking about this. It's 2 miles. That's less than the distance from here to my house. My house is 2.8 miles from here to the house. And it's a mile and a half from here to the gas and go. So it's not that far. It's walkable. So as was part of that culture, because it was only 2 miles, many other people from Jerusalem went to Mary and Martha to comfort them and to be with their friend while they're in mourning, which is what people do. They go and just comfort each other and cry together, and this is what Jesus walks into. So when Martha hears that Jesus is coming, she runs out to meet him. Mary stayed at home. And I thought this was very typical of what I understand of Mary and Martha, especially from the Luke 10 story where they have Jesus over for dinner, and Martha is like doing her thing and getting all the dinner together and fixing stuff, and Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha gets upset and says, Jesus, she's just sitting here. She needs to get up and help me. And Jesus says, no, she's chosen the better thing, so just leave her be. Martha, very much in her head, probably the older sister, because to me that's more of a firstborn trait than a secondborn trait. So I guess, I don't know for sure, that she is the older of the two. So she's much more in her head, and she's not really falling apart, where Mary just can't get out of her feelings. Maybe she's like really is hitting her hard, and she feels, operates more from her heart, her emotions. So when Martha gets to Jesus, she said, I don't know that she was very nice about it. She might have been a little ticked off at him, maybe. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Why did you wait? Why did you let this happen? If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. But here she goes back into her head and her good theology, where she's probably heard Jesus say these things, and growing up as a Jewish person, she's probably heard them and knows them. But I know, don't we do this, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Hint, hint. I know he will. And Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. Well, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Because they had this idea of that. So, yes, of course I know. I know he's in a better place. I know he'll raise up in the resurrection. And Jesus' response, which we read, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Our bodies, we know this. Nobody gets off this planet alive. We all have that expectation. We all know we get there. But even so, believe in him, we live. He's life. And whoever lives by believing in me, will never die. I'm not sure if she had a concept of what that actually meant, but looking back, we do. We know that when our body passes on, the core, our soul, the core of who we are, continues to live on. And then we wait for that, like she said, that resurrection at the last day. Do you believe this? Yes. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God. So she goes to get married, because apparently Jesus was asking for her. So she gets up quickly and goes to him. And though he was still outside and was not in the village with him, Mary went there. Of course, she's followed by people who, I don't know if that would get annoying to have people around you all the time when you're trying to grieve and they're following you everywhere, wouldn't he? But when she reaches him, she falls at his feet. I almost showed a clip from that same movie that I did last week of this scene, and it shows her running and falling down at his feet, just in a heap of grief. And she says the same thing, and maybe not as so much being like maybe ticked off like I think, or frustrated like I think Martha was, but with just that urgency and that desperation of, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. If you had been here, if you had come when we asked you to come, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus doesn't offer her any words. He doesn't offer her any doctrine. He doesn't offer her any platitudes. He doesn't pat her on the back and say, oh, there. I'm here now. Oh, in this clip, he just looks at her. And you can see the pain on his face as he touches her face and the tears on her face. And he is deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And it's not just that he's sad. I've heard, because it says it again that he, in verse 38, once more, he goes to the tomb, that he is deeply moved. And I've heard other people say, oh, he just, when Jesus wept, the famous shortest verse of the scripture, Jesus wept, that he was sad about having to bring Lazarus back from wherever he was, maybe. But what those words are is not that just that he was moved. Of course, I believe he was moved by their grief, by their sadness, but he was also mad at the situation. That deeply moved is not just, oh, I'm so sad. It's like, I'm so mad at this situation. I'm mad that we have to do this. I'm upset that death is a thing, and that people are grieving, and that people are sad, and that we have to go through this. So I think it encompasses all of those emotions that we might feel in a situation of loss. But when he's weeping, the people say, oh, see how he loved him. But then others are like, well, couldn't he opened the eyes of the blind man? Couldn't he have saved this guy too? How could he let this happen? Again, how could he let this happen? Then he gets to the cave and asks the stone to be taken away, and Martha, up in her head again, wait! He's been in there for 4 days. That means he is... Jewish tradition was that it was for 3 days it was possible for the soul to come back to the body. So that's why he didn't raise him sooner, because they could have said, oh, his soul just came back into his body, he's fine. It had to be after those 3 days. So he's dead. There's this guy that I started following, that's weird, on Facebook. Funeral fun facts. Yeah, he does these. I've done so many funerals. It's one thing that interests me. Sorry, not sorry. And he will answer questions. What's this for? What's this? How do we do that? Why this? Did they come in feet first or head? Whatever. And one of them that he did recently was what happens after a body dies. And how the temperature goes down, and the blood cools, and all this stuff, and then the body starts to digest itself. So, it doesn't smell nice. So, after 4 days of being in a tomb, yeah, exactly. I can remember watching Beth Moore preach about this one a long time ago, and she has a Lysol can, and she's like, "My Lord, he stinketh!" Because that's what the King James says. He stinketh! With, spraying a can of Lysol. I'm trying to stop. I know, but you can't do that. But then Jesus is like, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they take away the stone. He looks up. He's probably already been praying. But out loud he says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he said this, he calls out in a loud voice, specifically to Lazarus, because he was probably in other tombs were there, and if he would have just said, "Come out," who knows who could have come out. Could have been everybody. So you had to be very, very specific for Lazarus to come out. Hands and feet still wrapped. Take off the grave clothes and let him go. And many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary believed. Or come to visit, Mary it says, and Martha. They saw this happen and they believed. But then if you go on further, others saw it too, and they were like, "We got to do something about this guy." And so that was where the plot really thickens towards Jesus' arrest and the cross. But what really got me this week about this story is that Jesus allowed Lazarus to die. He allowed his good friends to go through that sickness, to watch their brother die, to bury him, and to feel that grief. He allowed that to happen. And we could think, a lot of people do. What kind of a God would allow that? Good God wouldn't do that. But he does. He allows things. We don't always understand why. Here we know why, because he says why. It's for the glory of God, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Even this is not the ultimate place where he is glorified. That happens later when he's on the cross and when he's resurrected. But it's a reminder that he does. God does allow things. And he allows suffering, he allows death. We don't understand it. But that is oftentimes where the light breaks in. Where we go looking for God. Where we wonder about God. I saw a quote from Charles Spurgeon, and I wish I would have saved it this morning. But it was something about like that, and like throwing a rock at the dog to get the dog to come back. That's what, the pain and the suffering is almost like that. There is a guy that I listen to that tells a story of going somewhere meeting up with a shepherd guy, and the guy had the flock, and he was wondering about the shepherds and the sheep knowing the voice of the shepherd. And the guy's, "Oh yeah, I can call out, they'll come, but I've got this one. Then if I do that, he'll run the other way." "Well, what do you do?" "Well, I get a rock and I throw the rock and I hit the sheep, and then the sheep will come back." So that you can, look at pain and suffering is that way, that's often a way that God uses to bring us back. But also we see where Jesus feels the grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her stages of grief. You got the 5 different stages that we think are linear, but they're not. You can put all of those into what Jesus is feeling here with the pain and the frustration of the situation. He feels that. Here, you want my water bottle?
Mary's fixing to save my life. Got one, too.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But what we need to see about Jesus here is that he feels it.
Yeah.
He doesn't like it either. He doesn't like it any more than we do. He's frustrated with the situation just as much as they are. He feels the grief, he feels the pain. And he's in them, with them in it. And he gives to Martha what Martha needs. I think Martha needed those words. She needed the words that Jesus said. She needed to voice that. I know he will rise again. I know God will give you whatever you ask. And then he points her back to himself. It's not just these teachings and these platitudes and things that we say. He points back to me, to Jesus, not me. I am the resurrection and the life, and gives her himself in this way, through the words. And then he gives to Mary, and it's with Mary in the way that Mary needed him, which was no words. It was presence. And again, it was himself. And what about us? I mean, they're dealing with loss, from grief from loss. And that's usually the only way we talk about grief is because somebody has died. And who has not, we've all experienced that. We all understand kind of what it is, how it is, maybe from different perspectives, parent versus spouse versus a child versus a cousin versus a grandparent or distant relative. It's all different. But we understand that kind of grief. Well, there was a day not a few weeks ago that I just was not feeling good. And just physically. I was like, I don't feel good, I don't want to be here, I don't feel good. And just kind of, the prayer just kind of went to, well, I don't feel good about this. And I don't feel good about this. And I don't feel good about this. And I don't like how any of that has gone. I don't like it. And as I realized later that what I was really feeling was, and experiencing was grief. And it wasn't because anybody had died. What I learned, there's a term for it, it's called ambiguous loss and ambiguous grief. I'm telling you, y'all have experienced it too. You just may not have recognized it. I didn't realize that I'd probably been dealing with this for a decade, probably, a long time. But it is the loss of a person, relationship, whatever, but usually a person that's still here. They're not physically gone, but they're just not here. And it can be the loss of a relationship with somebody. I think about, my adult children, 3 of them out of the 4. It can happen because of addiction, because of illness, or they're just even moving from one location to another. The most painful grief that I felt, aside from loss, is when I left Hawaii, when I lived there 4.5 years, when I had to move. It was the place that I grieved, but it was the church and the people that I was involved in. It was torturous. It was horrible. So sad. And I was getting emails. The email was new at the time. And I had to email the secretary that was mailing out these newsletters like, oh, you got to stop. It's too painful for me to remember being there. But it's also, we can experience that through the loss of identity. That whole empty nest thing. Children growing up and not needing me anymore. That's been a grief for me also, is realizing not only do they not need me, they're not choosing me. So that's some grief. Retirement, haven't been there yet, but it's an identity. You are your work. What are you going to do now? Who are you now outside of that? So you grieve that loss until you move in to the next one. But also loss of dreams, plans, a way of life, familiarity, comfort, wellness, rejection, estrangement. Did I mention addiction? Yeah, I did. Divorce you didn't ask for. So many ways that we can experience this ambiguous loss. It just makes us sad. And sometimes we might go to Jesus and go, why did you let this happen? I don't understand why you let this happen. We did all the right things, but you let this happen. And that's one way that we can handle this grief is to look back to Mary and Martha and what they did. And ask him that. I haven't mentioned this in a couple of weeks, but inviting Jesus in to something, based on Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and whoever lets me in, I will come in and eat with them, and they with me, and we'll have a great time. And to invite him in, to sit down at the sanctified imaginary table with Jesus, with the grief, and I don't like this. I do not feel good about this. Why did you let this happen? Where are you in it? Because he didn't chastise them for doing that. He listened. He took it. It's I understand. He understands. Shoot, he's getting ready to go to the cross. He's rejected by the people he came to save. I think he knows a little bit about this. But we can take that all to him. And he might give us some words. He might send us to some scripture or story or something. Or he might not. He might just sit with us in it, like he did with Mary. And not, so I can be glorified. Okay, where, how, when, what? I don't know. Is it glorified in the situation, or is it glorified in me and my response to the situation? Or is it somewhere down the road, glorified in it? Or is it going to be looking back and I'm going to see where that happened? But the most important, this is the most important thing that I've learned, a little bit of thinking and researching and experiencing that I've done, is that the most important thing, and it's what he said to Martha, is, I am the resurrection and the life. And the most important thing is to be rooted in the ground of his being and who he is, and not in the circumstances or in the pain or the questions or the wondering. But to be grounded in him. He is the resurrection. And in the case of death, he's overcome that. And honestly, he can overcome anything if people, especially our loved ones, will just cooperate with him. But we can't make them. There's a lot of things that are just out of our control. All of these losses that I mentioned, most of them are out of our control. So what do? Do we stay in that? I saw this diagram in this book I've started reading about it, where she's you can stay in the hope that they'll come back, and the hope that this, and the hope that that, and just stay in the grief. Or the internal hope. That's why we sang that second song. Our hope has a name. It's Jesus. That's always the answer. To be rooted and grounded in him and his being because of who he is, the resurrection and the life, and he never rejects and never fails. He's our source and our hope. So that he will be glorified, so that, darn it, we can make it through. A little bit easier than if we're trying to do it ourselves or trying to hold on to the grief We're human. We're going to feel it, and we need to feel it. So it's not bad to feel it. We need to. We need to process it, though, as well. And we need to process it and get through it with Him, grounded in who He is, so that He would be glorified. And though He allows things, He's not happy about it any more than we are. He's not, and it sounded like He was a little, hey, we're going to go wake him up. But then when He gets there, he feels it with them. And often in that brokenness and in those hard times is when we can find His presence the strongest. Because we're more dependent. Maybe because we're a little bit broken. You've probably heard this legend or stories gone around emails and Facebook and stuff of, I don't remember what it's called, but some Japanese, Asian, Chinese thing, when a bowl or something gets broken, they will repair it with like gold in there, so when they put the light in it, the light shines a little brighter. But sometimes it takes some holes and paint in that for the light to get in also. And also for the light to come out. As Paul talks about comfort, I think in one of the Corinthian letters, so that we can give comfort. We're then enabled to give comfort because we have received comfort, so that we can carry that light to others. But the most important thing to know and to take from this is that grief is not bad. We can take our questions to Him. Why did you let this happen? I don't understand. But to be rooted and grounded in Him, to know He feels it and He walks with us in it, and we're never left alone. And that because of Him, because of what He went through on the cross, and because of His resurrection, we have hope. And that we will make it through, and that God will be glorified. Amen.